and good evening audience. Now with us, leader and legendary diabetes management, Dr. Sepur Krishnamurthy Garu from Kannur. Dear sir, dear speaker sir, I requesting you kindly start the session today's pleasant evening.
Yeah, thank you, Madhu, for your kind introduction. Very good evening, my dear friends and my professional colleagues. Today, we are going to talk about the case based outlook to optimize the SGLT2 inhibitors and the DPP4 inhibitors, the fixed dose combination in the management of type 2 DM. And before I get into the topic, I request all the participants to type your questions in the chat box so that I can take up all the questions or queries at the end of my session. So this is Dr. Sepuri Krishnamohan. I'm an endocrinologist practicing at Karnool. So So, as you are all aware that the type 2 diabetes mellitus is a progressive disease and the onset of the macrovascular complications occurs very early in the metabolic dysregulation, that is very in the early period, even in the period of pre-diabetes. So if you see this cartoon, you can find the onset of diabetes is much later than the genetics and the weight gain and the dyslipidemia, hypertension, the impaired glucose tolerance and the impaired fasting glucose, which is termed as pre-diabetes. Then it starts the over diabetes, which is again the early phase of the diabetes and the late phase of the diabetes. So these are the determinants of this particular the macrovascular complications even prior to the onset of type 2 diabetes. And the background pathology of type 2 diabetes mellitus is nothing but the insulinopenia and the insulin resistance, and most of the times combined with the insulinopenia and insulin resistance. And in our Asian population, it is more so the insulin resistance that plays the background pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes, and starts with hyperinsulinemia, then the insulin deficiency and the insulin resistance, and it leads to the hyperglycemia, and it leads to first to start with the macrovascular complications. As the age advances and the duration of diabetes advances, we find the microvascular complications. And so let us know something about this dysglycemic legacy. And what if the glycated hemoglobin, the HbA1c, is not controlled very early in the course of the disease? The poor HbA1c control in the first year of diagnosis is associated with the increased cardiovascular risk in long term, and also it leads to the increased risk in the microvascular complications as well. This is what the dysglycemic legacy is. It is nothing but the patient is not taken care. The A1C in the early period of the disease, in the diabetes, is not taken care properly, especially in the first 1 year after the diagnosis. The dysglycemic legacy is carried forward, leading to so many complications, including the cardiovascular complications, that is the myocardial infarction, the acute coronary syndromes, the heart failure, and the strokes, and the microvascular complications, per se the diabetic kidney disease and the diabetic retinopathy and the diabetic neuropathy. So in this you can see this the dark blue is the dark blue is that represents the patients with HbA1c of around or more than 7, not receiving intensive therapy within the first year, is given in the dark dotted blue, navy blue, and the light dotted light blue is the patients with HbA1c of less than 7% who received the intensive therapy before the first year of diagnosis. And what happens in the dotted line? You see, the both of them started from somewhere around some 8.3 or 8 somewhere else or 8.4, and you can see the after a period of 5.3 years, there is a significant increase in the risk of this the dysglycemic legacy. That is, the patients who are above the range of the glycated hemoglobin 7% have a significantly increased risk of myocardial infarction by 67%, and the stroke by 51%, and the heart failure by 64%, and the composite cardiovascular events by 62%. So whereas you can see this the light blue dotted line, the risk is very much decreased when compared to the A1C maintained above 7 and below 7. And this is the dysglycemic legacy is, that's what I told in the first 1 year, that is that stays until 12 to 15 months. And the study was done for a period of 5.3 years. And let us take this case as an example. Let us look at Mr. Vijay, a patient of uncontrolled type 2 diabetes on the metformin. Vijay is a corporate executive, non-smoker, 49 years old, and has got the history of diabetes for the last 2 years and hypertension for the last 6 years. And the treatment, he is on metformin 1 gram BD, and for hypertension he is on the combination of amlodipine 5 milligram and the telmisartan 40 milligram once a day, and his HbA1c is 8.6%. That is definitely 1.6% above the normalcy, that is 7%. And he is obese, and the body mass index is 28.5 kilogram per square meter. So what should be the target HbA1c for Mr. Vijay? So Vijay, already we have talked about a corporate executive, non-smoker, 43 years old. He's got diabetes, he's got hypertension. He's on metformin 1 gram BD, amlodipine 5, telmisartan 40, HbA1c is 8.6, and he belongs to the category of obesity, and BMI being 28.5 kilograms per square meter. And on the right hand side you can see that the A1C being 7 in the center, whether we should go for a more stringent treatment or a less stringent treatment is determined by multiple factors. That is, the risk potentially associated with hypoglycemia and other drug adverse effects, and the disease duration and the life expectancy and the important comorbidities, and the established cardiovascular the vascular complications, and the patient preference, and the resources and support system. So if at all we need to go for more stringent, the risk potentially associated with hypoglycemia and other adverse effects must be low. If it is high, you can go for less stringent treatment. And the disease duration, if it is newly diagnosed, we must always aim at 6.5 to 7%. If it is long-standing diabetes, so keeping in view of the comorbidities and other factors, we need to go for a less stringent treatment. And if the life expectancy is long, we need to go for more stringent glycated hemoglobin targets. And if it is life is short, we can go for a less stringent one. Likewise, the important comorbidities, if they are absent, we can go for stringent control. If it is associated with the comorbidities and they are severe, you have to go for less stringent this thing, because they get into hypoglycemia and other associated metabolic disturbances. And the established vascular complications, if they are absent, you can go for a tight control, and if they have got severe complications, you have to go for like a less stringent one. And the patient preference also, if the patient is highly motivated and excellent and self-care capabilities are there, you can go for a more stringent, like 6.5 to 7%. And the preferences are less and burdensome therapy, you can go for less stringent, as well as the resources and support system also. So this is taken from the standards of medical care in diabetes from American Diabetes Association. And what should be the target HbA1c for Mr. Visay? The primary consideration is a more stringent goal because his A1c is 8.6. So more stringent goal we target at around or less than 7% for Mr. Visay, and the HbA1c is more than 16% more. So we what is required is more than 1.5% HbA1c reduction to achieve optimum glycemic control in this case, in this particular case actually. So what should be the approach for this particular patient? So the history we have gone through, and what should be our approach after metformin? This is $1 million question. Should we add a single drug like the DPP4 inhibitor or the SGLT2 inhibitor or the sulfonylurea or the alpha glucosidase inhibitor or the pioglitazone or insulin? What is the next drug of choice is $1 million question. And the second option is add on with a fixed dose combination of SGLT2 inhibitor bar DPP4 inhibitor. What would be the best choice? Let us discuss in the due course. And the maintaining glycemic targets with a single agent can be difficult to achieve. Yes, we all know that the earlier days when we were students, like medical students, and we were taught like, okay, you should start metformin with the low dose and go slow, like start with 250, escalate it to 500, then after 1 month you escalate it to 1 gram, after that you go for 1.5, and after that you go to the maximal dose of 2 grams. That's what we were taught in medical school like this. But the nowadays funda is hit early, hit hard. That is the funda with diabetes. See, most of the times in clinical practice, all of you are well aware that it's very difficult for us to control the diabetes with one single drug to start with. Though the recommendations say that the drug of choice in type 2 diabetes is always to start with is metformin unless otherwise it is contraindicated. But most of the times metformin alone is not sufficient to get back to the normalcy of the HbA1c to the target or to the goal, that is either 6.5% according to the American College of Endocrinology or 6.5 according to the American Association of the Clinical Endocrinologists, and around or less than 7 by American Diabetes Association. It's very difficult for us to try with one single drug like metformin. So what we need is some sort of dual therapy. So glycemic control tends to decline over the time with monotherapy. That is the lesson that is learned from the landmark study, that is United Kingdom prospective diabetes study, and which was, you can see the bar diagram on the left hand side and the right hand side. The 4,075 patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus were randomized to diet alone, insulin, sulfonylurea or metformin for 9 years. That's what the UKPDS says, which was started in the year 1977, and after 10 years they studied after 87, and after 97 it is after 20 years, and 2007 after 30 years also it's been studied. Now it is still ongoing. The UKPDS is still ongoing actually. That is, you can see on the right hand side, the patients adequately controlled on metformin. You can see only 44% of the patients were able to get back to the normalcy. They adequately controlled the glycemia is only 44% in the first 3 years, whereas in the 6 years it is reduced to 34%, and at the end of 9 years it has come down to only 13%, 13%. A very, very minimal portion of the patients were able to get back to normalcy after 9 years. So what it indicates is the glycemic control tends to decline over time with monotherapy. So likewise on the right hand side you see the patients adequately controlled on sulfonylureas. Glibenclamide was the sulfonylurea used in the UKPDS. These were the drugs, that's all. The insulin and diet alone, insulin and sulfonylurea being the glibenclamide, and the metformin were the drugs used in the 1997, because there was no other drug other than that. Okay, so on sulfonylurea, the glibenclamide was able to, like in the first initial 3 years, 50% of the patients were able to get back to the normalcy with reasonable the glycemic control, and it has fallen down to 34% after 6 years, and after 9 years only 24% of the patients were to the target. So it indicates very clearly what I have mentioned. The glycemic control tends to decline over time because there is pancreatic beta cell death. It's a progressive disease. Type 2 diabetes is always a progressive disease, and by the time we diagnose the case of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, only 50% of the functioning beta cells are there and 50% are already dead. And the annual death rate of the beta cell is 4% per annum. That is almost on over a period of 4 to 5 years, the decline will be more than 75%. That is called the pancreatic beta cell reserve. At that particular time, no drug other than insulin would act. So, as the disease progresses, there will be pancreatic bankruptcy, and it is time for us to see that we should try to preserve the beta cell, functioning beta cell reserve mass. And this cartoon shows the targeting multiple mechanisms underlying the type 2 diabetes. This is called the omnious octet. That is this thing. This was postulated by Ralph DiFranco, the father of modern diabetology. So the patient uncontrolled on metformin has got has got reduced incretin effect, and there is the increased lipolysis and increased glucagon secretion, and decreased glucose uptake by the muscle, and the increased glucose reabsorption, and the decreased secretin, and the neurotransmitter dysfunction, and the hepatic glucose production. So when we give metformin, the patient uncontrolled on metformin, what metformin does is it increases the hepatic glucose production, as well as it indirectly acts on the muscle. The glucose uptake will be increased by the muscle by metformin, and the DPP4 acts at the level of incretin and acts at the level of glucagon secretion, and the SGLT2 inhibitor, it acts at the level of the muscle, it acts at the level of the kidney by increasing the glucose reabsorption, it acts at the level of insulin secretion. It is an indirect action. So the SGLT2 inhibitors and the DPP4 inhibitor, the fixed dose combination, provides a 360-degree approach to act on the omnious octet, that is the pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes. And the complementary glucose lowering activities of SGLT2 inhibitors and the DPP4 inhibitors. So on the right hand, left hand side, you can see the non-insulin dependent mechanism, and is equivalent to minimal risk of hypoglycemia. On the right hand side, you can see the DPP4 inhibitors. On the left hand side, you can see the SGLT2 inhibitors. The SGLT2 inhibitors, they basically act on the kidneys, and an indirect action on the pancreas. Thereby, it leads to the kidneys they increase the glycosuria, that is, the glucose will be excreted more from the kidneys. It is roughly around 80 to 120 grams per day, and that reduces the glucotoxicity. Thereby it reduces the weight, thereby it reduces the systolic blood pressure as well as the diastolic blood pressure, the daytime as well as the nocturnal. Put together, the 24-hour blood pressure control is there. And the indirect action on the pancreas is from the DPP4 inhibitors as well as the SGLT2 inhibitors. That is an indirect pancreatic effect that's seen in the form of the increased beta cell sensitivity and the increased glucagon secretion. and the dual pancreatic effects like increased glucagon, the increased glucagon secretion and the decreased glucagon, and on the intestines the incretin effect that is seen at the level of the GLP-1 and the GIP more so. The GIP is very important when compared to the GLP-1. So it increases the GLP-1 sensitivity and it increases the GIP-1 sensitivity. So put together it leads to like weight neutrality and the weight gain caused by SGLT2 inhibitors and the weight neutrality caused by the DPP4 inhibitors. They contribute towards the decrease in the hyperglycemia, thereby it leads to euglycemia, that is normoglycemia, with added pleiotropic effects. And now we can see this the article published in the Diabetes, Obesity and Metabolism, a journal of pharmacology and pharmacotherapeutics, and the effect on alpha and beta cell function of sequentially adding empagliflozin and linagliptin to therapy in people with type 2 diabetes previously receiving metformin, an exploratory mechanistic study. What it shows is an important aspect of the beta cell dysfunction in patients with T2DM is the failure to release the adequate amounts of insulin in response to the increasing glucose levels, and treatment with empagliflozin and linagliflozin led to a marked improvement in fast and the late phase of insulin response, that is the first and the second phase of insulin response, what is typically called. What is lost in diabetes is the absence of the first phase of insulin response and the delayed late phase of insulin response, that is restored by this treatment with FDC of the empagliflozin and linagliptin. And after the metformin failure, empagliflozin and linagliptin is an attractive option due to the additive effects on the postprandial glucose control, most probably mediated by the complementary effects on the alpha and the beta cells. And you can very clearly see this particular graph wherein the baseline you can see with the red, and the gray is metformin plus empagliflozin, and green is metformin plus empa plus lina, and the blue is metformin plus empa plus placebo. You can see the difference in the reductions of the blood glucose levels. And you can see the recent guidelines recommended in an initial the combination therapy in patients with uncontrolled HbA1c, the American Diabetes Association Standards of Medical Care in Diabetes. Even the 2021 guidelines have come into vogue. They have been there on the net. You can download that from the net. It is there from the last the 10th December 2020. The diabetes care says the pharmacological approaches to glycemic targets. There is data to support the initial combination therapy for more rapid attainment of glycemic goals. That is to halt the dysglycemic legacy, we need to go for an initial combination therapy with metformin. Certainly, since the absolute effectiveness of most oral medications rarely exceeds 1%, initial combination therapy should be considered in patients presenting with the A1C levels of 1.5 to 2% the above the target. So, as per the recommendations, okay, an affordable patient and an affordable country where there is an insurance system, you always can go for the best drugs like after metformin. Along with metformin, you can go for a combination of the empagliflozin 10 milligram to 25 milligram and the linagliptin 5 milligram. But as a country, practically I'm talking about our country, our scenario is totally different. We don't have an insurance system. Being a developing country, we always tend to add a sulfonylurea, preferably either the gliclazide or the glimepiride, to metformin to start with. And there are multiple add-on therapies, and if the patient requires this particular combination, wherein there is the patient is according to the recommendations of the evidence-based medicine, the patient is at risk of developing the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or is got an established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease at the time of diagnosis, these drugs are inevitable because in the long run they are going to help the patient a lot. The combination of metformin and the empagliflozin and the linagliptin, they are going to help us a lot. But our pus will not allow us to go straight away to these the molecules. So this is my practical approach. And where does our patient feature on? It's a the metabolic cardio-renal continuum. See, it starts with the obesity and diabetes and hypertension. On one hand side, you can see the hypertension and the other risk factors like diabetes, obesity and elderly that leads to atherosclerosis and left ventricular hypertrophy, leads to myocardial infarction and stroke, and it leads to LV remodeling and again the ventricular dilatation and the congestive, the cognitive dysfunction and the congestive heart failure and the secondary stroke and the end stage heart disease and the brain damage and dementia and the cardiovascular, the cerebrovascular death. And on the other side, the same hypertension and the other risk factors, diabetes, obesity and the elderly, that leads to endothelial dysfunction which leads to microalbuminuria. And now the term microalbuminuria is being discarded by the latest American Diabetes Association Standards of the Medical Care in Diabetes 2021, and it has replaced the terms called microalbuminuria or the proteinuria with UACR, that is urine albumin creatinine ratio is the term that is been substituted. So for microalbuminuria or albuminuria or the proteinuria. So and leads to macroproteinuria and nephrotic proteinuria and end-stage renal disease, that is ESRD, that is stage 5 kidney disease, wherein the patient needs to be on either hemodialysis or the renal replacement therapy, RRT, that is what is called. And I want to tell you at this particular junction, no patient would literally die of the end-stage renal disease, because before that the patient dies of the cardiovascular disease even before the patient dies of a kidney disease. In fact, that's what happens in the practical life, because this particular microalbuminuria is a sensitive indicator for future cardiovascular disease, as well as the erectile dysfunction is a future indicator of the sensitive future indicator of the cardiovascular disease or death. So you have to pick up the patients at the level of this particular microalbuminuria, that is UACR, the urinary albumin creatinine ratio. If it is less than 30, it is normal. If it is less than from 30 to 299, it is we call it microalbuminuria. Now it is the UACR, and the overt proteinuria, and followed by the nephrotic proteinuria. And if we don't stop this at this particular point, and the patient is going to die from the cardiovascular disease actually. The significant reduction in A1C with empagliflozin and linagliptin fixed dose combination in patients on metformin background, you can see on the left hand side you find a low baseline A1C and a high baseline A1C on the right hand side. You can see the EMPA 25 and the Lina 5 milligram combination has reduced the A1C from 7.90 to at least 1.19 reduction in the glycated hemoglobin, whereas the EMPA 10 milligram with Lina 5 from baseline of 7.9 HbA1c, it was able to reduce to 1.08 HbA1c, and the EMPA 25 alone was able to reduce to an extent of 0.62, and EMPA 10 was able to reduce to the extent of 0.66 of glycated hemoglobin, and linagliptin was able to do to a tune of 0.70. That is what we can draw this inference from this particular these bar diagrams is, when put together the reduction in the A1C is very much more, and almost you can say it is a synergistic combination rather than an additive combination. So on the right hand side, the high baseline See, you can clearly see that if there is a low baseline, the reduction of A1C is low. If the baseline A1C is very high, the reduction of HbA1c with either the empagliflozin or the linagliptin is more than that of the low HbA1c. So you can see 9.06 of glycated hemoglobin as the baseline here, and from that it reduced the empagliflozin 25 milligram and linagliptin 5 milligram was able to reduce the HbA1c by 1.84, the maximum reduction, and the EMPA10 and the Lina 5 was able to reduce by 1.61% of HbA1c, whereas alone EMPA 25 was able to reduce 1.22% of HbA1c, whereas EMPA 10 to a tune of 1.29 and Lina 5mg to a tune of 0.99. So what is the inference from this is the one thing is very clear: if the baseline A1C is low, the reductions with these particular molecules will be low. If the baseline HbA1c is high, the reductions in the A1C are also high. So early achievement of goal with empagliflozin and linagliptin fixed dose combination, even at 8% baseline HbA1c, only FDC arms could reach the target HbA1c. You can see very clearly in this, the left hand side you can see the drug naive patient, that is a de novo T2DM comes to you, and on metformin background you had already seen the starting from the violet the Lina, and the green the EMPA 10, and the dark green is EMPA 25, and the blue is EMPA 10 and Lina 5, and the dark blue is EMPA 25 and Lina 5, and you can see the maximum reductions with this particular EMPA 25 and the Lina 5 milligram. Even on the metformin background also you can see the same type of pattern, and the reductions are very similar, and reductions are very effective when used along with metformin, the fixed dose combination of linagliptin 5 milligram and the 25 milligram of empagliflozin. And despite high efficacy, no increased risk of hypoglycemia with empagliflozin and linagliptin FDC. You can clearly see the percentage of the hypoglycemia, the events, and it is 1.8 with the empagliflozin 25 plus Lina 5, and it is even less with EMPA 10 and Lina 5, that is 1.1% only, and EMPA alone is 2.2, and EMPA 10 is 2.2, and Lina alone is 1.5. So what it says is the combination is much more better when compared to the incidence of even the hypoglycemic episodes also. It is very much minimized. So the metformin also is not associated with hypoglycemia. Metformin and this empagliflozin and linagliptin also is not associated with increased incidence of hypoglycemia. So that's a very positive aspect of this particular the drugs, because they don't act on the pancreas directly. They have got the mechanisms of different mechanisms, like they act on the kidney, they act on the level of the liver, they act at the level of the muscle, and so many extra pancreatic effects it has got. It acts on the level of GLP-1, it acts on the level of GIP. So we don't find this incidence of hypoglycemia much with these combinations, the FDC combinations. The lower incidence of genital tract infections with empagliflozin and linagliptin, yes, see, for known or unknown reasons, so the incidence of the genitourinary tract infections are little bit higher in those patients who are on only the SGLT2 inhibitors and not on this particular linagliptin FDC. But when put together the empagliflozin and the linagliptin, the definite decrease, you find a definite decreased incidence in the genitourinary tract infections. Let it be the simple urinary tract infection, or the candidial or the monilial infection, to the very serious the Fowley's gangrene, that is some case reports are there with this particular SGLT2 inhibitors, the necrotizing fasciitis of the perineum, which is otherwise known as, they also called as like Fourni's gangrene. So incidence is less. So what we believe to be is the linagliptin is going to have changed the pH of this particular genitalia, and it is going to alter the pH of the genitalia so that the environment for the growth of the organism is little bit changed, so that the who find the increased the decreased risk of infections when the empagliflozin is added to linagliptin 5 milligram. And this is a bar diagram showing the empagliflozin and linagliptin FDC affords a significant reduction in the body weight, blood pressure, and serum uric acid levels. These are all the desirable effects. See, a drug should be like, see why serum uric acid is very important, because high levels of hyperuricemia are associated with type 2 diabetes and hypothyroidism, and vice versa, the type 2 diabetes is associated with hypothyroidism, and hypothyroidism and type 2 diabetes are associated with hyperuricemia. So whenever you get a case of hyperuricemia, you need to look for type 2 diabetes and the hypothyroidism retrospectively, and when you get a case of type 2 diabetes, you have to rule out hyperuricemia and hypothyroidism, and when you get a case of hypothyroidism, inevitably you have to rule out type 2 diabetes, or even in the children, the type 1 should be ruled out, and the hyperuricemia always should be ruled out, because they go hand in hand. So the body weight reduction is an added the bonus with this the SGLT2 inhibitors. The greatest the benefits of SGLT2 inhibitors are, apart from the glucose lowering efficacy, apart from the blood pressure reduction, apart from the body weight reduction, apart from the serum uric acid reduction, it reduces the 3-point MACE actually, and that is the cardiovascular death, the non-fatal stroke, and the non-fatal MI, and it reduces drastically the incidence of acute heart failure or the chronic heart failure. That is very, very important. Either the heart failure with the preserved ejection fraction, that is HPF, or the heart failure with the reduced ejection fractions, that is HF. So these are all the advantages of this particular. You can see the body weight clearly, that is from 85.5 kilogram of baseline, it is able to reduce 3 kilos, and the EMPA 10 and Lina is able to reduce 2.6 kilogram, and the BP reduction also you can find the 3.6 of this particular the empagliflozin 25 with plus linagliptin, and the 2.2, and this is systolic and this is diastolic, and the 10 mg bar 5 mg is able to reduce this systolic blood pressure by 2.8 milligram of mercury, and the 2.2 reduction of the DBP with this EMPA 10 and Lina 5, and you can find the reductions in the serum uric acid from the baseline of 292.7 micromoles per liter. It was able to reduce to 55.9 with 25 and 5. With 10-5 it was able to reduce by 60.7 micromoles per liter. So these are all the beneficial effects of our the fixed dose combination of the linagliptin and the empagliflozin. And let us get into the insights into potential cardiovascular benefits with empagliflozin and linagliptin fixed dose combination. The concept is the increased pulse wave velocity and resultant arterial stiffness leads to the adverse CV events. You can see the lunar cartoon. They are showing the slow pulse wave velocity, that is normal arterial stiffness to start with. As the disease progresses, it goes to the increased pulse wave velocity, that is increased arterial stiffness, and to start with the young patient with no cardiovascular risk factors will move along with the age. The increased age is associated with increased cardiovascular risk factors. So put together, it leads to increased cardiovascular mortality. The population studies and hypertension, the diabetes and the end stage disease. These are all the risk factors which are clubbed with this increased cardiovascular mortality. And the increased age and the increased cardiovascular risk factors and the increased pulse wave velocity and the increased arterial stiffness will result in abnormal afterload and the ventricular arterial interactions, which lead to the myocardial fibrosis on the one hand and the left ventricular hypertrophy on the other hand, and finally the myocardial dysfunction on the other hand. So insights into the potential cardiovascular benefits with empagliflozin and linagliptin. So the evidence is the 4.6 effects of combined therapy of empagliflozin and linagliptin versus metformin and insulin glargine on blood pressure and vascular function in patients with type 2 diabetes. You can clearly see the difference, and the inference is empagliflozin bar linagliptin combination significantly improves peripheral and central blood pressure, pulse wave velocity and resultant vascular function. It improves the vascular function finally. And on further investigations, this patient Vijay has got subclinical cardiovascular disease. ECG changes suggestive of LVH. You cannot take LVH very light. This is the ordinarily we see in almost all the hypertensives have this left ventricular hypertrophy, but in due course left ventricular hypertrophy predisposes to the reduced left ventricular ejection fraction, leading to heart failure. And the 2D echo is almost normal for this person. Left ventricular ejection fraction is 60%, and urine albumin creatine ratio, as I said, it is 200. That is it's a sensitive risk factor for the future cardiovascular disease. And according to his serum creatinine and all, the estimated glomerular filtration is 75 ml per minute. Madhu, there is some disturbance actually. Hello, can you mute yourself, please? All the audience, all the participants, can you mute yourself, please? There is lot of disturbance, sir. Please mute yourself. Okay. And the question is this a problem? Is this a risk factor? How will it change your management? Let's come to that. Our patient has got progressed along the metabolic cardiorenal continuum, that is the subclinical cardiovascular disease and the structural heart disease and the microalbuminuria, and he's got hypertension, obesity and diabetes, and we have to prevent him from progressing here. You have to cut this barrier, the cycle I said, the hypertension and the other risk factors like diabetes, obesity and the age, which leads to the LVH, which leads to the endothelial dysfunction, which finally will damage the heart and the kidney. We need to stop, we need to prevent the cardiovascular death and the cerebrovascular death and renal death also. So this is high time we have to use this particular fixed dose combinations of the empagliflozin and linagliptin along with metformin. So the cardiovascular and the renal outcomes with SGLT2 inhibitors, the empagliflozin shows consistent reductions in all the CV and renal outcomes, and you can see here the significant reduction regarding the hospitalization for heart failure and the cardiovascular death and the 3-point maze and the renal outcomes. You can see this, the empiric outcome was done with empagliflozin, the canvas is with canagliflozin, the declared TIMI 58 is with dapagliflozin, the Vertis CV is with etogliflozin, which is not available yet in India. It is a molecule from Merck. It is available in the US and the Western scenario we find. And the one that has got all the beneficial significant reductions in the hospitalization for the heart failure and the cardiovascular death and the reductions in the 3-point maze and reductions in the renal outcomes is seen with the empagliflozin. You can see the hazard ratio and you can see the confidence interval also, whereas the canagliflozin was able to be like successful in the reductions of hospitalization for heart failure and 3-point maze and renal outcomes as per the latest credence, and the declared TIMI, the dapagliflozin was able to be very efficient in reducing the heart failure as well as the hospitalization for heart failure, and the renal outcomes also was very good with regards to this dapagliflozin with the latest DAPA the kidney trial, and the Vertis CV literally failed to meet the primary endpoints, but it was able to show the effect on the heart failure positively, and even the hospitalization for the heart failure was positive in Vertis CV. But for that, the Vertis CV was a disappointing the cardiovascular outcome trial. And we have got one Indian gliflozin, that is remogliflozin, that doesn't have any cardiovascular outcome trials. And one thing you have to keep in mind, the comparison of studies should be interpreted with caution due to differences in the study design, population and methodology, because the inclusion criteria and the exclusion criteria totally differs from one to one. So we cannot compare one to one straight, head to head on to head, like we cannot compare. And the Emperor reduced the recently the results of Emperor HRF. It is the results have rolled out that adds to the evolving evidence of empagliflozin in patients with left ventricular ejection fraction around or less than 40. That is HRF, that is heart failure with a reduced ejection fraction, with and without type 2 diabetes, with an EGFR of around or more than 20 ml per minute per 1.3 square meter. And the top line efficacy results, the overview of 3 endpoints specified for hierarchical testing, the Emperor reduced. You can see the it has met the primary endpoints and the secondary endpoints and the key secondary endpoint, that is primary endpoint being the adjudicated cardiovascular death or heart failure hospitalization, and the Emperor reduced. The p-value is hazard ratio is 0.75, whereas the p-value is less than 0.001, that is statistically very significant, and the key secondary endpoint is same. They adjudicated first and recurrent heart failure hospitalizations. The p-value is 0.001, which is statistically very significant, and the key secondary endpoint is EGFR slope, that is slope difference of that is 1.73 ml per minute per 1.3 square meter per year. Even here the p-value is 0.001, which is statistically very significant. So it was able to meet the primary endpoint and the secondary endpoint and the key secondary endpoint also with regards to the cardiorenal continuum, that is the cardiovascular benefits as well as the renal benefits. And the EMPA heart study, the beneficial effects of remodeling with empagliflozin, the effect of empagliflozin on left ventricular mass in patients with type 2 diabetes and coronary artery disease, the EMPA heart cardiolink 6 randomized control trial. It was published on 22nd of August the 2019. The running title is the Verma et al. The empagliflozin reduces the left ventricular mass. The EMPA heart study, first confirmatory evidence of left ventricular mass index regression with an SGLT2 inhibitors in patients of type 2 diabetes with CAD majorly without heart failure within the 6 months of therapy. And one thing I would like to highlight here is you have to be little bit cautious with the DPP4 inhibitor vildagliptin, which increases the left ventricular volumes, which increases the left ventricular mass index, so which may predispose to the future heart attack, heart failures. So you have to be careful in patients in whom you are using this particular vildagliptin. That was very clear with the VIVID, that is VIVIDD study, VIVID study. That was very quite evident that vildagliptin has got an adverse effect on the left ventricular volumes, and left ventricular mass index was increased actually, whereas this was wonderfully reduced with empagliflozin. And the cardiovascular and the renal outcomes of the DPP4 inhibitors, linagliptin has ample evidence and it is safe across all the cardiovascular and the renal outcomes. And again you see the endpoints here, the significantly the increased risk is red actually, and the heart failure and hospitalization for heart failure, the cardiovascular death and the 3-point MACE, then the renal outcomes. The Seva-TIMI 53 was done with the CVOT done with saxagliptin, and the TECOS was with sitagliptin, and Carmelina is with linagliptin, and the examine is for alogliptin. They have not mentioned it here, and you can see the hazard ratio is 1.27 with saxagliptin with regards to heart failure. So this is one drug which has not proven to be safe in patients with heart failure. So you have to avoid this particular saxagliptin in case you come across with the case of heart failure. It is not a safe drug. And sitagliptin is okay, but it is got a neutral and a limited evidence. And the only molecule that has got a very significant effect with regards to hospitalization for the heart failure, the CV death, the 3-point MACE and the renal outcomes is the Carmelina, wherein it has shown to be very effective in reducing all the events, and the only one drug that doesn't require any dose titration in any degree of the renal failure, that is in any case of this thing, any staging of cardiovascular, the renal failure, that is stage 1 to stage 5, the end stage renal disease, is only linagliptin. Linagliptin doesn't require any dose titration, like you can continue 5 milligram as it is until the ESRD, or even during the dialysis, during the renal transplant and post transplant also, along with insulin you can use linagliptin safely. And one more is you don't need to titrate the dose of teneligliptin also, but we don't have the studies and this is not approved by US FDA actually. It doesn't have any cardiovascular trials, and I've already told you vildagliptin, there is no cardiovascular outcome trial. The VIVID, that is VIVIDD trial, gives evidence of increased left ventricular volumes with vildagliptin, which may in future, like in that may lead to the heart failures. So try to be very cautious with the vildagliptin. That too, especially a patient with established cardiovascular, the heart failure, you have to be very cautious. And there is one more gliptin, that is evogliptin also is there in our country. Evogliptin and the teneligliptin are only the gliptins confined to India, South Korea or Japan, not to the other countries. So we are talking basically about the molecules which are being approved by the US FDA. And the possible albuminuria effects with linagliptin, learnings from the Carmelina. And the linagliptin significantly delays the progression to albuminuria by 14%. You can see the left hand side, the 14% relative risk reduction with linagliptin with regards to the delayed progression to albuminuria, and the 15% relative risk reduction with greater likelihood of significant regression in albuminuria with linagliptin. You can see this from two graphs, the right hand side and the left hand side. And the essential elements to be considered while choosing empagliflozin plus linagliptin FDC is the strength of evidence and the safety and the stress-free usage. And so first of all, it comes the efficacy and the choice of endpoints in the cardiovascular outcome trials and the pre-specified cardiovascular and renal endpoints. The empiric outcome, the primary endpoint was like 3-point MACE, and the Carmelina, the primary cardiovascular endpoint was 3-point MACE. The secondary endpoint was ESKD, that is end-stage kidney disease or end-stage renal disease, renal death, or the decrease in the EGFR to a tune of around or more than 40%. And the quality of results in CVOT, the empiric outcome, the empagliflozin and the Carmelina, the linagliptin, you find there is 14% relative risk reduction with regards to 3-point MACE, 38% relative risk reduction with regards to cardiovascular death, 32% of relative risk reduction with all-cause mortality, and 35% of relative risk reduction with hospitalization for heart failure. And the Carmelina, the proven cardiovascular and the renal safety with potential albuminuria effects with linagliptin. And again, the essential elements to be considered while choosing the empagliflozin and linagliptin, that is the proven mortality effect benefit with empagliflozin in T2DM with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, the class 1 recommendation by European Society of Cardiology and European Association for the Study of Diabetes 2019, way back it has given the evidence from AC, ESC and the AST. And the safety, we have got ample safety with regards to cardiovascular safety, that is evidence based. And the stress-free usage, both empagliflozin class 1 and linagliptin class 2 recommended in type 2 diabetes mellitus patients at risk for heart failure. The recommendation was from the European Society of Cardiology and the European Association for the Study of Diabetes way back in 2019. And the empiric outcome, 39% of relative risk reduction of incident or worsening nephropathy in T2 patients with established cardiovascular disease. And apart from this, the cardiovascular evidence, you have got the renal evidence also. The Carmelina has reduced the 14% of relative risk reduction of progression to albuminuria in type 2 diabetes patients. And the hepatic evidence, which is very very important, the no dose modification required in hepatic impairment with both empagliflozin and linagliptin. And nowadays this has become one of the drugs of choice for the patients with NAFLD, that is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or the NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Apart from the drugs of choice like metformin, the pioglitazone, and the statins, and the SGLT2 inhibitors, and the DP4 inhibitors, and the vitamin E, that is 400 milligram BD. So along with the statins, fenofibrates. So along with that, the treatment of NAFLD and NASH, there is ample evidence that SGLT2, DP4 inhibitor, linagliptin, and empagliflozin are going to help in the regression of NAFLD and NASH. And in patients with the type 2 diabetes and NAFLD, empagliflozin significantly reduces the liver fat and improves the ALT levels. That is E-LIFT study. And minimal risk of hypoglycemia with EMPA and LINA FDC, the potential risk, lower risk of genital tract infection, and less side effects, and very ease of use, the convenience of an 8 mm single oral daily pill with minimal monitoring, that makes the strength of evidence, yes, the safety, yes, and the stress-free usage, yes. With regards to efficacy, it is okay. With regards to the choice of endpoints in cardiovascular outcome trials, it is yes. The quality of results in CVOTs, it is yes. With regards to safety, the cardiovascular safety is proven, the renal safety is proven, and the hepatic safety is also proven. And the stress-free usage is ease of use and less side effects and no hypoglycemia or minimal hypoglycemia. So, priceless versus priceless benefits of EMPA plus Lina FDC. You can go through this. It's a comparative study between the empagliflozin and the linagliptin FDC with the remogliflozin, the Indian gliflozin with vildagliptin combination. Whereas you can see the green is the benefits and the yellow is the safe, and the which with into that is no evidence, and red is harmful. With this you can see this, the empagliflozin reduces the risk of 3-point MACE, and it reduces the risk of 3-point the MACE and CV death and hospitalization for heart failure and the renal endpoints and hepatic impairment also. And linagliptin also is very safe in all these points which I have mentioned. And you can see this is no with because there is no cardiovascular outcome trial with remogliflozin. So we cannot say it is yes for 3-point MACE, CV death or hospitalization for heart failure or the renal outcomes. And Vilda, as I told, it increases the left ventricular volumes from the VIVID study, and vildagliptin should not be used in patients with hepatic impairment. No clinical data with remogliflozin. And the daily convenient dosage is once a day dosage with EMPA and Lina, whereas Vilda and Remo have to be given twice a day, and that makes the drug of choice is the fixed dose combination of EMPA bar Lina over the Remo bar the Vilda. And the effects of empagliflozin and linagliptin FDC on the metabolic cardio-renal continuum, and you can clearly see the robust 1.8 HbA1c reduction in patients with uncontrolled and metformin, like our case, this particular Mr. Vijay, and significant pleiotropic benefits, weight and BP reduction, and the cardiovascular remodeling evidence with empagliflozin, the EMPA heart, and the 3-point MACE and the heart failure benefits with empagliflozin, that is EMPA-REG outcome. The albuminuria effects with the linagliptin, with carmelina. So finally we are going to break the vicious cycle for Mr. Vijay by using the combination, fixed dose combination of empagliflozin and linagliptin to the already existing molecule, the metformin 1 gram BD. Thereby the CV death reduction, risk reduction in patients with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and the type 2 diabetes mellitus with empagliflozin. Renal safety is established with linagliptin over the multiple center clinical trials and evidence from Carmelina, and the empagliflozin demonstrates the potential renal benefit as an exploratory endpoint in EMPA-REG outcome, and the empagliflozin significantly reduced the risk of CV death or hospitalization with a heart failure in the EMPEROR reduced trial conducted in patients with the reduced ejection fraction, that is the HRF, that is heart failure, that is the left ventricular ejection fraction being around or less than 40% with or without type 2 diabetes. With that, we come to the summary. The optimizing benefits of empagliflozin and linagliptin, the FDC for our patient Mr. Vijay, and it addresses the multiple pathological mechanisms in type 2 diabetes mellitus, the robust HbA1c reduction with low hypoglycemia risk, and the decrease in the weight, the decrease in the BP, decrease in the albuminuria, and improved in the vascular function, and the robust evidence for the cardiovascular and the heart failure and the renal outcomes with empagliflozin and linagliptin, and the proven mortality benefits with empagliflozin in type 2 diabetes with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. That is the class 1 recommendation from European Society of Cardiology bar European Association for the Study of Diabetes way back in 2019. Sorry. So both empagliflozin with class 1 recommendation and the linagliptin with class 2 recommendation, they are recommended in type 2 diabetes mellitus patients with heart failure, as evidenced, the evidence given from the European Society of Cardiology and the European Association for the Study of Diabetes. It is safe and cost effective, convenient for once a day dosing. So I conclude by saying this is a wonderful molecule. The fixed dose combination of this particular empagliflozin 10 bar 25 with a fixed dose combination with linagliptin 5 milligram is a safe add-on therapy in the initial period, that is to break the dysglycemic legacy in the treatment of the management of type 2 diabetes, and it's very easy to start and very easy to titrate and very easy to monitor also. So I thank you everyone for patient listening, and if at all there is any question, okay, I'll be glad to take the queries and the questions, please. Madhu, are you there? Questions questions in the chat box. It is almost empty. As there are no questions seen in the chat box, and so Garima, yeah, nice to see Garima again. Any questions, Garima? Right, okay.